Okay, I guess it's time for me to get my picture on. Let's make sure I'm somewhat presentable here. Okay. All right. So, how is every... Hello, Madfinger. I know that CW's been streaming for over an hour, so I figured that he's probably going to be winding down soon. He hasn't been doing, and if he does continue to go on, you know, again, this is more of this is more egghead type stuff. I'm not sure what's going on here, and I want to get my unkie share a picture that was sent to me. Hello, Raksha. So, I often, in many of my videos I've made, as well as, you know, I haven't made videos, you know, I make live streams now. But for a very long time, I've kind of said that there's something wrong with the historical timeline. Hello, Enjoy Being. Anyway, but before I get into that, I just want to, you know, do some shout outs for the content and context creators in our greater community. You know, people who are doing what I'm doing, what Raksha's doing, what CW's doing, what Joe from the Carolinas is doing. Meandering Mystic putting out his wonderful stuff. Posmo, Positive Momentum, went to Disclosure Fest and did some kind of guerrilla journalism there. And apparently, I think the person accompanying him was Robert Elder, if I heard CW correctly. And Saroth the Mage has, I know he's had a channel up for a while, but recently he's been putting out his context, taking it in, you know, in his unique form of magical direction, which is a magical direction that many people will still share. You know, the Hermetic traditions, which I'm not a fan of. I like alchemy. Hello, Robin. Alchemy is a very ancient form of language, and then Hermeticism came along with new systems, and of course, there's legitimacy in all systems. It's like there is great wisdom in Scripture, because they took our wisdom and added it to Scripture to camouflage a narrative. So anyway, and Calendal, another one. I want to kind of just make sure, you know, the ones that I know are kind of putting out some kind of content or context fairly recently, or have recently started getting more active. So that'd be, you know, okay, Calendal, Meandering Mystic. Of course, Raksha Moose, his own unique streams, the one he and I do, Mystic and Muse, the one that he and Niche do, Dangerous Discussions. Saroth the Mage, Joe from Carolina, CW Chanter, and of course Jerry Cthulhu. So that's kind of like a quick wrap up, I think, of the people in our greater community, you know, that we all kind of know when we drop into chats, we kind of all recognize one another. So I put a link in the description below this live stream, and it's I think it was just put up today or yesterday, and I believe it's from Zohar Gate Productions. And Zohar Gate puts up a lot of different kinds of new agey stuff. But they, you know, because they're kind of taking from many different sources, to me, some of their sources are very good, and some of their sources are some of the dog food they put out. So this one, this one is based on the New Earth series that Sylvia Ivanova has been putting out for a few years now. And her original stream of thought that she put out when she started doing the videos was called "When the Survivors of Atlantis Woke Up." And she has, I don't know if she's got 100 or more videos there, and they're artistically beautiful. They're well done. She's got a good sense of humor. She'll call the current academicians quackamedicians, or she'll call them penguins because often they wear suits. She's funny. She pokes fun at the current power. Also, last night at rehearsal with Uncle Butchie, we did our first rehearsal of "Go to Your Room," the Goob song. Who knows? Maybe I'll play. My acoustic guitar is downstairs. I would have to go downstairs and get it. It's still there because I was teaching Butch the song, and then once he had the chord structure, I was able to put down the guitar, pick up my bass, which is something I had to learn. I've been playing it on guitar all along. And the night before, I worked out the bass parts, and I was going to be singing, reading, because some of the words are not hard programmed yet, and figuring out my new bass parts for a song. But still, we played the song twice, and it's coming along quite nicely, or quite well. The word "nice" is really a silly word. I don't have to look at myself. I can be in chat a bit. And I certainly will. I certainly will enjoy being. My story. I like that. My story mystery. Yeah, it's kind of like that's something I won't riff on that, but if our story for individually becomes my story, and the composite is our story. Hello, Deborah Gale. And then you would get part of where this is going is that in many ways our story is a mis-story. And even as I said that, okay, mis-story, like a mistake. So history is a mystery, or a mis-story of our story. Ooh, all right. Little riffing going on there. Little real-time epiphanies going on. Thank you, Enjoy Being. You triggered me. So I have, while CW is going, I have a feeling that this will be a relatively a small crowd, which doesn't, I don't mind, because this video is still going to be seen afterwards, and I feel the topic is something to knock around. The mystery of our story is something that we begin unraveling, and we start with some clues, and but the real beginning is to allow the facade, the mask of history to fall away. And as the mask falls off, we might not know what is that face. It's not even fully formed, not even sure where an eye and a nose is. Doesn't matter at this moment. We'll put the eyes and the nose and the mouth in the right place as we start to reassemble it. But of course hello Jorge. But of course the reassembling of our story isn't as important as our story we're making now. And to me, a big part of our now story is recognizing the fuckery of it all. The fuckery of history, fuckery of city-states, the fuckery of government, the fuckery of the legal system. And so the whole thing is, okay, this stuff really bites. It sucks. So the thing is, it's brainstorming time, and we don't need the answers next week, but we need to begin. It's kind of like, let's get those seeds at least prepared with a thought to putting them in the ground. So after this talk, if anybody's going, when I get a little more deep into it, and people are going, huh? Watching the 40-minute, it's only a 40-minute video, the one that I included, and it's visually beautiful. The man has a pleasant speaking voice, but he's speaking of Sylvie's material. And for some people who seem to struggle with Sylvie's Bulgarian accent, I don't, but I can understand that some people would. You won't have to struggle with this gentleman's accent. It sounds kind of like a refined hint of Irish in there somewhere, because he says book, but so does Simon Parks, and he's English. But there's little hints that he's, like, let's say from England, the UK, let's put it that way, or Ireland. All these names. And but one of the things that is most intriguing, and Sylvie has put it forward in a number of her videos, but it gets a little more, it gets like a real focus in the video that I've presented below. I forget the exact title of it. I should have put the title there too, and I'll probably do that afterwards. But there is, when you look at the dates on a lot of, whether even statuary, but a lot of the dates they're working with, let's say it says 1655. Let's say it's dated what looks to be 1655. And what they're drawing attention to, and in many of the originals, the 1 is usually not a 1, it's an I. In some cases it's dotted, in some cases it's not, and then very often after what would be a 1 is a little dot, because the way of the time was the I, and then later sometimes they put X. So, but in each case the I was Iasos, the X was it was a Greek letter, the letter Chi, which is, when you ever see the X with what looks like a P, that's actually the Chi Rho, or the Kr sound in Greek, meaning Christ or anointed. And so two of the ways that the people of a couple hundred years ago, 400 or 500 years ago, dated their things would look like either an I and the year, or an X and the year. And so, in other words, you can see two ways that gets corrupted. So if something let's say they're writing 1655, the 1655 supposition as a date. What they're saying is that it was 655 years either after the birth or death of Christ. So there's like a 33-year wiggle period, according to the official account of the life of the character Jesus. Now, much of this, hello Kalendal, much of this, you missed me mentioning you as one of the context creators, but you can all see that later. Anyway, so I'll probably get out of my camera for a second. So what we're seeing is that these dates are based on the hundreds of years after the birth or death of Christ. So that's a give or take of roughly 30 years. Interestingly enough, Anatoly Fomenko, who is very much a part of one of the people who, because he's a mathematician, he's a professor too, was able to take what looked like way too many, a wrong calibration of eclipses, both of the sun and the moon, and plotted them correctly, and he saw what looked to be a loss of anywhere from like 400 to 1,000 years. But another aspect of Anatoly Fomenko's work is he seems to identify historically in, I guess, in Eastern Europe, or maybe in Turkey, that area, or something like that, because Turkey the western edge of Turkey is on Europe proper, as opposed to the the Anatolian part, which is part of Asia. And he identifies a figure that was crucified, and for all intents and purposes seems to be the source of the material, at least from Fomenko studies, for what we find for the quotes in the New Testament. If my memory serves me correctly, because this is relying on my memory for this, the date of this crucifixion was somewhere either like in the mid, what we would call 1000s, or even early 1100s, if my memory serves me correctly. But let us just, again, for easy math, let us say that he identified this person as being around like the 10th century. Or would be, I forget, that's right, they do everything backwards. So it would be the 11th century, would be the 10s. But if the historical person that the Christ mythos was built on was executed around like 1000 something, and this is in fact the figure that the people of Eastern Europe and other parts of Europe are referring to as the Christ, when they're writing something like 655, like 1655, or I-655, that would be 655 years after this person died. And if this person died around the year, was executed around the year 1000, or a little bit more, then what looks like 1655 was in fact, if you move everything forward 1,000 years, then 1650. Where am I? Okay, I'm using the wrong instance. I'm going to use the creation of the Roman Church, because that'll kind of bring this into the perspective I want to. Let's say the Roman Church. We're going to pick round numbers. 300 A.D. Okay, so that'd be after the death of Christ. So in this kind of new way of looking at the timing, that means that the Roman Church was founded roughly in the 1300s. And so therefore the Roman Catholic Church isn't even 1,000 years old yet. If the start of when the prophet Muhammad received his revelation from the angel Gabriel, if that happened in the 600s, in the time after Christ, Islam wouldn't even be 500 years old right now. So these are things this is the direction that part of this looking at how people are telling us eyes are the number one, when if you take a look at it, it's like, that's not a one, that is an eye. Or in certain cases, so let's say somebody wants to write the 3rd century after the birth of Christ, they might write one, an X for Christ, and then a 1 for each century. So what looks like 13 centuries after Christ is in fact 3 centuries after Christ, if that date is around the time what we think of as 1000 AD, or 1000 years ago. So in the medieval period, what it looks like they're doing is they're kind of taking what happened before 1000 and kind of moving it behind that number, as opposed to like almost contemporaneous. I mean, it's really pretty interesting to think of what we think around the time of Christ, the Roman Empire, and if you could, I mean, it really looks, there's a good chance that things are 1,000 years different. In other words, the ancient world is 1,000 years closer to us. Towards the end of the video, Sir Isaac Asimov, who was commissioned to do genealogies, I guess for some royal families or maybe the king and queen themselves, was finding real problems with the dating. And Isaac Newton himself said, what the history of Rome looking, history of Egypt looking so many thousand years ago was in fact at least 1,000 years closer to us, if not more. It seems like with Egypt, certain things might have, especially ancient Egypt, things might even be more like 1,600 years displaced. So let me just check in with the live chat before I consider rambling on, see how I'm doing here. Hello, Meandering Mystic, and hello, Sandy says, no, Bible study is for people who would believe in it. And if I don't believe in something, I'm not going to talk about it. I'm not much, good on knocking other people's works unless they have, accepted. But some of this might have to come into it. But this is the work I'm attacking tonight is the work of historians. But it really does seem that much of this is tied in with Pope Gregory's recalibration of the calendar, the Protestant Reformation, the millions of females that were killed, basically burned at the stake in Protestant Germany. The most amount, everybody talks about the Inquisition. Let me tell you, the Inquisition was nothing compared to the witch hunts of Protestant Germany. Sarcasm in chat work terribly. I found that out. I mean, I tried goofing recently in a text. Actually, it was Tanish. I tried like a little humor. Man, humor does not work very well in text. So, one of the questions would be, okay, why would they mess with the timeline? Well, there would probably be a couple of streams thrown on there, but I want to get what I think is probably the trunk of that tree as opposed to some of the branches that come off of that trunk. That the current sickness of the world, the current archontic rulership of the world has not been going on, as far as the total control that is basically going on right now, has not been going on as long as history would have us believe. Psychologically, I better get out of the chat. Psychologically, I'll get my train of thought back. The reason would be to create a sense of futility. It's just like, oh man, it's like, what can you do? This shit has been going on for thousands of years. When in fact this shit may have only been going on for hundreds of years and maybe 1,000 at most. But it seems to me that the real, if we kind of really nail the real beginning of the fuckery with the Roman Empire becoming Christian, and then the extermination of the pagan people after that, which basically was Europe. The population of Europe was pagan. And then if we kind of recalibrate it, that extermination happened roughly 700 years ago, or maybe even 600 plus. Long enough, but not as long as it would appear. And then that would kind of make like that that, you know, roughly 200 years later is when Columbus leaves Europe and then comes to America to kill more heathens, to kill more pagans. Except the pagans were the country people in Europe, and the heathens are the same people in an anglicized sense, because Pagani is Roman, which basically means nature worshiper. Official Roman religion, with the temples and their pantheon, was not pagan. The later church fathers will call it pagan, but the word Pagani was invented by what modern people would call the pagan Romans. For the multi-god system of the Romans, but it was a formalized temples and formalized statues. When they were talking about the Pagani, they were talking about the hillbillies. They were talking about the nature worshippers, the people who practice the old ways, which is why the polytheistic Romans, before they became Christians, had a pejorative word for people who did not worship their gods and actually were tied in with the old nature system, the old ways of Gaia, Mother Earth. And even though some of them were not, some of them were quite rustic, it was an honest and animistic connection. The Pagani were animists, as were all of the non-official pagans. I mean, you come into a world that's alive, you realize that the world is alive around you. And so that sets up for animism. The polytheistic Roman cults of pre-Christian were not animistic. So a big difference is that, again, so from the monotheistic or archontic perspective, you know, anybody who wasn't monotheistic, they're now calling pagans, but the word Pagani was invented by what many people would refer to pagans now, which would be the Roman polytheists. I hope that's clear. So it's really kind of interesting to think that if the Roman Church really started kind of like in the 1300s, and then in the late 1400s, Columbus comes to America. This would really change perspectives of like how relatively recent this lockdown, this psychological lockdown, and of course the creating of the city-states and with modern border management. And it seems a lot of the modern border management had to do with finding if people had books on them that needed to be used for firewood. The extermination of people and the information that those people had was meant to be quite complete. And one of the most important of those narratives was the one of the mystery schools. True Gnosticism was what the mystery schools taught. It wasn't the stuff that we would find in the Nag Hammadi text. The Nag Hammadi texts have some of that information, just like modern scripture has a lot of our old wisdom that they include to make it seem like this is a wholesome piece of work. You don't hide poison in nasty food. You hide poison in wholesome food. Hopefully a very rich food, just in case the poison has a slight flavor to it. So, the contrivance of a longer timeline is really to make it seem as if the system that we're living in has, not a centuries of being this way, but millennia of being this way. I'll just take a breather and see what's happening in chat. Hello, Mari. I think the last time you were here, I didn't see you. And after when I saw the replay, I said, "Oh, I hadn't." There was a few people, one or two people I hadn't said hello to. And if I ever miss somebody, it's not because I'm dropping you out; it's because I missed your name. Yeah, Angkor Wat, I have a feeling is not particularly old. Even when you look at the forest growth of Angkor Wat, that's not hundreds of years of forest growth. That barely looks more than 100 years old of forest growth. Really, when you seriously consider how things grow in that part of the world, in the jungles, and how fast they take over, then when one looks at Angkor Wat, it looks like it was abandoned maybe 100 years ago. And then we have the whole issue of the huge Eurasian continent or a country of Tartaria that had flags. And I recently did a little reading on it, and already, not just Wikipedia, but other little things, they're trying to tie it to some khanate, that Tartaria was part of a khanate. I mean, so obviously, not only are they trying to have they basically gotten Tartaria off the maps and out of memory, but should anybody find an old map or watch one of these things, the disinformation is already being put up, so that when you go to look for Tartaria, they have the quackademic explanation of what you're looking at. Yeah, that's a different subject, Mari, and I'm not going to do that one. That's a whole other subject. And one that, there's a certain amount of visuals to it, but we're going to need a little bit more than what things appear to be. But there's no question that when nature was left alone, the trees were huge. There were certain suppositions that I'm not discounting, but there are certain, there are suppositions, and it's going to take a little more time for me to not have them run in parallel. Like when something looks pretty good, I can have it run in parallel with other ideas. I don't have to choose one or the other. But the ability to make a case logically and with some kind of evidence besides looking at something and saying it looks like that. I mean, that's a good start. It makes you want, it's like, okay, I got my ear out and my eye out for more to put this story together. And yeah, trees were a lot bigger. Oh, one of the things. I should get back to my camera. I don't think I shared this with anybody. As you might have known, Uncle Butchie played we played a gig last weekend, but I don't have any pictures of that. But I do have this picture here. There we go. I don't know if I showed this before. That's us at Dogtown at a benefit we played. I shouldn't be too hard to pick out in this picture. And of course there's Butch Robbins himself on the banjo. Mark, our drummer, is hidden behind his drum set, but there is a drummer there. There is a drummer there. Matter of fact, I had asked Mark, because when we played this past Saturday at Rootstock, and I was talking about how, when I came off the stage, all kinds of people were greeting me and offering me nice things, and Butch had the same thing, and Mark said, nobody did that to me. So I said, that's part of being a drummer. So you have to dress a little flashier, or that might continue to happen. But okay. Yeah, well, the bat is getting a good showing tonight, Robin. It's been spoken of before. Rosh has made mention of it, but welcome to the Bat Recognition Night. Yeah, basically, you know, what we have, whether it's Jesus or just his story in general, is it isn't about accuracy. It's about narrative. Everything that from education to media to books to the history is taught is all about the formation of a narrative. Because one of the things I spoke about recently is we're born into a conversation. The medium we move in, the psychological medium of our psyche, are the conversations that we're having. And so what history has done, as we know it, was to commandeer the narrative, commandeer the conversation that we have about the past, so that conversation is a false one. It is a fictional conversation. And even the monks who were rewriting history, and it seemed like every time they had a bunch of old texts, and then they copied them, just to keep it moving, there were fires in these libraries, and all the old texts were burned, but none of the new texts were. Time and time again, such coincidences happened. And the Benedictine monks were one of the main monks kind of commissioned for keeping history alive, creating it and then keeping it alive. And they were saying that not only were they copying the old texts, they were correcting them to fit modern times. Fit modern times. Oh yeah, to fit the narrative of modern times is what they were doing. Mari, the wise men of the East who were astronomers or sky watchers were part of the old Magian tradition, and that is where John Lash in his studies over the years has placed where the Gnostic the information base developed, and that's where one of the things he's teaching is what he calls celestics, which is really the modern reappropriation and learning, the skill, having the modern skill to read the sky as the Magi did. And so they'll often be called astronomers and astrologers, but the astrology that they worked with was sky-based astrology and not zodiac. So the sky was not broken up made a perfect circle with each of the 12 signs given 30 degrees of that circle. That is not how the Magi did things. They didn't map out where the planets were on this clock. They looked at where they were in the sky and in what constellation they were in. And when they were in a constellation, they were in a constellation. It didn't. So just like the last lunar cycle, not the two before then, when the moon arose in the eye of the bull, which now that's the constellation. It's the constellation of the bull, which then was zodiaced into Taurus. And so you would figure, okay, the next lunar cycle should arise in the twins, right? Because according to the exact movement, if you're in one sign in 1 month, you go to the next sign. But it just so happens that the moon arose towards the end of it, arose in the eye of the bull, and when the next lunar cycle came, it was still in the bull. I think like the leg or the hind part of the bull. I think it was a lower leg. So there was another shift in the bull, and and it hadn't moved into the twins yet, although the zodiac would have, clockwork moved it into the twins, but that was not what was happening in the skies. And so that's a difference kind of between zodiac astrology and sky or astronomical divination. And apparently that area arose in the Permian Plateau, which would be now modern Iran, kind of close to the Caucasus Mountains. And with modern dating, again, okay, modern dating, that would have been 8,000 years ago. That the kind of the formal beginnings of a mystery school knowledge base were developing. That would then become the full-fledged mystery schools that we have in quote-unquote history, as what they know as the Eleusinian mysteries, mystery schools for short. And then we have, the modern, we have modern branches of the mystery schools, but they don't have the ancient mysteries. The ancient mysteries were stamped out. That part of the burning of the Library of Alexandria was either to burn them or to provide cover for the obtaining and then sequestering of what the knowledge of the mystery schools. And before some people with some Gnostic knowledge started mixing it up with the Hermetic and Abrahamic systems, which kind of produce what the Nag Hammadi texts, which are called Gnostic texts. There's plenty of Gnostic thought in those texts, but to call the Nag Hammadi text Gnostic text is absolutely incorrect, in my opinion. And I think even from a real, if you can really nail down what the Gnostic, even the word Gnostic is a pejorative. It means those who know, annoyingly so. Because there were some new people about with some new ideas, and one has to wonder how original they really were being. Hello, Zach. Yeah, enjoy being. It's really kind of interesting. I've watched a few what I consider to be good looks at New Zealand's history. And it really seems as if the Maori, at least there seems to be like quite a lot of mixing going on there, and I think they not so long ago, they did an excavation of a ship that had been shipwrecked, and they found it in the mud and were able to, I guess, carbon date it. And and also place where the origin of the wood came from. And the wood of this 4,000-year-old shipwreck, 4,000 years according to their science, came from the coast of China. So in other words, the wood of the ship off of New Zealand that they're calling 4,000 years old, the land that wood to build the boat came from was what we now call China. Who knows? It might have been Taiwan even, but it was China. And now, but then you have the discovery in especially more of the western parts of China of the tartan-wearing, blonde and red-haired, very tall mummies. So the ship that arrived in New Zealand 4,000 years ago, or maybe I don't know if they say 4,000 or 4,000 BC, and again, since the conversation here is timelines and being screwed with, it was prehistorical, we'll say. But so we know that the ship was built from wood that is now China. But what did the people who sailed that ship look like? The current government of China seems particularly uninterested in exploring their pyramids, and not too big on people coming and doing a whole lot. From what I've heard from people who are trying to get some stuff done there. I mean, I wouldn't want to create false narratives here. So again, I'm not stating it as an absolute fact, but what's coming through the grapevine is that there seems to be, let's say, poor support towards China looking into parts of its history that isn't already officially written. But we can't. The same thing happened. But we can't. Well, I'm hardly going to single out China. Romania has the same thing. Matter of fact, this thing is about some tablets that were found in Romania, and how they were declared frauds and then locked away. The Romanian government spending millions of euros to retrieve artifacts that were taken from these sites, to repatriate their history, and then after spending the millions of euros, declaring them to not be applicable to history and stashing them away. Kind of like buying, in many ways, they seem to have a pretty good budget to hide historical artifacts that apparently, according to them, are fake. Hello, Meditation Man. Never heard of Westford Night. And also, I mean, I've been on a lot of this track for a long time. So a lot of times the things that I'm asked to watch, and I get in them, it's just like, and I usually will try to listen to almost anything just in case there's something fresh. I got 42 minutes of dialogue. Maybe there's 5 minutes in there that's like, ooh, that's a new little clue. But it can't be too painful. I went to try and listen to a few things recently, and when they're just going off, when they're kind of riffing on official history, modern cosmologies. There's just a lot of assumptions because of the programming that people will come out with, and actually, and again, according to official research, they're correct. But if you disagree with their sources and think their sources are suspect, well, then in many ways their line of reasoning becomes suspect. Yes, like the Smithsonian, Madfinger. But yeah, I'd never heard of that name before, Meditation Man. By the way, welcome to Mystic Brew, Westford Night. Of course, and then of course, knights being one of the peerage of the British nobility. I hear that whole peerage thing is a little bit creepy. And we'll leave certain of the lower peerage titles out of it because it might affect people we know. Okay, enjoy pre. Okay, a joint being says pre-Japanese as in the people in Japan before the Japanese. New Earth has I think it's about a half-an-hour video about the samurai, and also pictures of Tokyo. When they first show you the pictures, you think that you might be somewhere in America or Europe. There is something really fishy about Eastern European, Eastern Asian official narratives as to who lived there maybe 500 years ago, maybe 1,000 years ago, maybe longer, and who's there now. And then, you know, you in certain of those kingdoms, you have historical book burnings, but then you'll go on, then you'll see refutations. Oh no, we really, those are false accusations written by the opposition, you know, the name calling. And it's kind of like, in many ways, it's kind of like listening to mainstream media news, where, you know, you have everybody, oh no, 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 oh, what you say, oh no, that's false. And the most important thing is to sow doubt. It isn't that anybody goes away feeling completely satisfied, but doubt has been sowed. And as long as there is an official narrative, and any other narratives that arise, if you can create doubt on any of the competition, you have weakened the competition. Hello, Anya Mungus. Oh, that, I think I might know you, Anya Mungus. And if you are where you are again, and you and also Madfinger, I recently had conversations in private, like, you know, a Google chat hangout type of thing, and the conversation went to energy and how to run power generators in series, and how you can kind of, I mean, and this how when you produce power, there's extra power you can chop off, you can reroute and end up with, you know, not quite anything 0 point, but where you can really lessen how much it takes you to run a system, and how you can kind of almost cascade one system into the other, where you end up with a lot more than you could have normally. So yeah, and your Mongus must be, well, since you're using first names here, I'll just say Kev, and your Mongus, you must be Kev, right? Yeah, enjoy being. I'm following that in NZ, and it really seems like the official, like, let's call it, you know, the English-based New Zealand government, you know, the part that's associated with the Crown, and the the Polynesian Maori, at least I think they're Polynesian, seem to be a little bit in cahoots with each other there. In other words, you know, like, we will be the indigenous people, and anybody who came before us didn't exist, something like that. So there seems to be some collusion between the what I would call maybe the last wave of indigenous, and then the Europeans, who the Crown, the Crown representatives. And that, in many ways, is, you know, whether or not it's political or whether it's just the, you know, the let's say, you know, the archontic mind getting to people where they are not comfortable, where there's always this lack of comfort with the way things are, if they don't make us look like stars, if we're just kind of settled into a bigger story, and we're, you know, we have our part to play, but we're not the top billing. Some people seem to get real butthurt over that, and then it sets up for all kinds of fuckery and collusion with fuckery from people you wouldn't ordinarily think would collude. But when you have all you need is a group of people and who represent a genuine indigenous sect, and then you have the psychopaths in that group. Somewhere, you know, any group can have up to like 3% of its, any population can be up to 3% psychopathic, and then you have those who become the elders and leaders and whatever, because they play a dirty game. You know, they play to win. Okay, I wanted to make sure that I had that right. Enjoy being. because I thought the couple of hours of that I watched seemed to be the documentary seemed to be responsibly made, and if I recall, I don't know if it was you or Ivanova that put them up to begin with. So it was people from New Zealand who put them up, and that's why I watched it. So again, there is a link in my description below of a short video, 40 minutes. I consider to be relatively short, to put some holes in the fabric of official history, some holes to peer through. Oh, Ellen did? Okay. Well, enjoy being. I don't doubt. Again, the Maori who are claiming to be the indigenous are, in fact, real people. They're not a contrivance. They're not part of the fiction. What just seems like they're the last ones there. They probably still have the most DNA representation as far as like they're strange. You can see it in them. You can still see the blonde and the red hair showing up, even in the Maori, which shows that there were other genetics there when they arrived. I mean, it would seem, and it would make the most sense that probably the most oldest and indigenous of New Zealand would probably be Aboriginals, like as we know them from Australia. A very unique genetic strain of humanity. And then from, so they would have been there and living that kind of very, very close to the earth kind of life. And then there seem to have, some millennia ago, have been waves of other people who chose to live more technologically advanced. And I really think in certain cases, certain people might go, oh, it's a bad IQ, and in certain cases it will be. But I think there's also a form of choice there. I mean, Neanderthals had huge brains, and it is my kind of inner knowing and journeying. Hello, Ellie. That the Neanderthals had dreamed the technology that would show up, but also saw the perils that it had, and they didn't want to break their connection to the earth, and so even though they had the capability to make themselves more technological, they didn't. And so when the more technological types came around, like what we'll call a Cro-Magnon, the ones who saw technology for the weapon it was, started calling the Neanderthals brutes and cannibals, all the normal stuff that you do to a people when you need the new group to exterminate the old group. And of course, the Neanderthals were incredibly strong. They were real earthy, incredibly robust. And again, a brain capacity, I think, at least 20% larger than our own. And so I would think that so the Australoid type of Aboriginals that we know, I get the sense that it wasn't so much an IQ thing, although in certain cases there might have been some kind of less left brain usage, because to live animistically, the left brain is good for certain things, but you don't live in there. You use it, for coordinates. You use it for what it's good for. I do think that there is a balance, just like there should be a balance between left and right hemisphere in tandem thinking. And I think that for the future, that's where we go. In other words, you look at, especially now, we kind of say, you know what, maybe we don't want to be as rudimentary, don't want to live as rudimentarily as the Aboriginals did or the Neanderthals did. We'd like something better than that. And I can get on board with that. So, but the thing is getting back into tandem, because now if Aboriginal and Neanderthal, we will call it this, okay? Very right-brained, intuitionally led life, dream, living in the dreaming. And then the left brain represents stepping out of the dreaming and into a technical, working with small detail kind of thinking. Obviously, I mean, we have swung way over to the left. We're very imbalanced. We're like animism as a concept has really dropped out. Holistic thinking, holistic with a W, because it has to be whole. Holistic with an H is a form of religion. Because there are blasphemous medical procedures in true, with an H, holism. So going into the future, I certainly think we can keep our cake, but just take off the artificially flavored and artificially colored icing on it. And so in the past, I have referred people to the New Earth series, and they go, oh, where do I start? Of course, when it comes to anything, you just pick something and start, and then work, and then if it grabs you, you keep on going. But in this case, there's one video to watch, and it's not Sylvie's Bulgarian accented English. It's a very pleasant English. It's concise, and I think again, it's just the right amount to make you go, And when it comes to history, instead of our story, there's some humming, there's some hum-do. And for those who join us a little later, enjoy being put in some interesting things with words. So so the words would be his story, which in other words, a story written by a hidden hand or a group of people, the controllers, the goobs, hardly the elite, and so they're the patrix, and that's the other thing. I still hear people who keep on referring to the false reality as the matrix. No, the matrix is the mother reality. That's that's the mother of everything. The patrix is what the Matrix movie was about. But once again, Hollywood will always mislead you, which is one of the reasons I have so many issues with people going to movies and staying fucked in the head through them. The artificial construct is the patrix. And that's why we have history. History of the patrix. Connecting the dots here? His story, patrix. And then, so instead of his story, we'd like to know what is our story. And then when we get to the individual that makes the collective, it could also be, what is my story? Well, depending on how you say it, like if you say history, then you would have mystery, and the mystery is what is my story, or my story. Mystery, my story. And what are they called? Or what are the schools that had the real knowledge? The mystery schools, my story schools. What is our story? And that is what the mystery or mystery schools taught. Our story. And the reason why they were wiped out, and anything that wasn't reconfigured and then able to pass it to modern times, but the real good stuff was burnt and was replaced by history, by the Patrix. Again, Hollywood took what they were describing the Patrix, and in their mother-hating, earth-hating, life-hating, archontic minds, they flipped it. And probably either because that's their natural thing to flip, or because, as usual, they love fucking. They love mocking what is real. And that's why they called that piece of shit, piece of silicon, that was made a citizen in Saudi Arabia. They call it Sophia. Okay? Both the Greek word for wisdom, and because of the quality of the goddess herself, her quality and her name are synonymous. So calling this silicon puppet Sophia is complete mockery by the goobs. That, you know, and then it was really interesting where I was in some kind of chat or comment recently, and it had to do with AI, and how it caught me off guard. They go, well, you know, in a battle, would this AI win with Sophia? And they were talking about the junk box. They were talking about that fucking sideshow of silicon. And so even there, as I'm reading it, here I'm seeing the word for wisdom, and of course, you know, a moniker for the planetary animal mother, or, you know, the goddess. And here is this conflation of this word, Sophia's, and then, you know, for clarity from the name, in planetary tantra we say Sophia. It rhymes with Gaia. There is, through media, one of the things that both media and the movies constantly presence is the Patrix. There are assumptions. I mean, think about when they do a layout based on, you know, even if it's a scary story, they're still riffing a lot on heaven and hell concepts that were not part of the ancient world. I'm talking about a heaven and a hell, as opposed to like some more Buddhistic things where the afterlife was quite a varied place, and how clear it was, I really don't know, because my own journeys show that there's quite a few options in the afterlife, and much of it depends on when you pass over what you think those options are. One of the reasons for ancestor veneration, not to be confused with worship. Worship is part of another system. And part of the reason for the veneration was very often what before the next incarnation, the spirits of those who passed over hung around, kind of played, you know, guiding spirits. And so, you know, kind of like the interlife period could be a very rich period, could be a restoration, but there was a real interactivity with those who still maintained bodies. And there were, and I'm quite sure, and of course certain superstitions could generally get involved. I mean, you know, the human imagination is an amazing thing, but it can also go, it can go off. We can have imagination that is in error. So the whole purpose of tonight was just I was just sitting here and I just got this. I want to talk about this, and figured, why not talk about it to a few people and then put it up as a video. Because I watched this video. Matter of fact, I finished watching this video about 20 minutes before I went live. And I was playing with the idea, because I hadn't done a mystic muse in a while, doing some music. But I'm kind of like, I'm not in that part of my brain tonight. I'm not in my musical brain tonight. I'm in a more thoughtful, I won't quite call it intellectual. It's intellectual, but for me, intellectual pursuits are kind of like the left brain grabbing some dots to plot out, and then letting the right brain flood that with intuition. It's really working in tandem. It's not like the left brain does this or right brain does that, but when they work in tandem, there are certain things that it's almost like playing guitar. My left hand frets the chords and my right hand does the strumming, but they work in tandem. Just doing the chords on the guitar without strumming it wouldn't work very well, and just strumming guitar without making chords would be pretty monotonous. So that, just the hands in guitar playing or in piano playing, that's a form of our hemispheres working in tandem. Each ones have different assignments, but together becomes this one thing. Hello, I walk. Rox, that's interesting. The ore is Turkish. And when I like exploring words, but generally as I'm parsing the words, there are all kinds of things, but there are the ones that then fall into place and create a greater narrative, as opposed to, endless pulling apart a word and all you have is a bunch of parts, kind of like dissecting a frog. You have the intestines here, you might have a leg muscle here, you have a heart here, and whatever, but you don't have a frog anymore. So very often when doing word dissection, the whole idea is to have new life come from those words themselves, new ways of assembling, and usually epiphanies from pulling them apart, like what Kalendal did with the word content, and how we have the word content. And I realized that one of the last things I wanted to do was make people content. This is not a time for content. And I've said before, this is a time for discontent, which is why this, a little bit on this thing about where's our story instead of his story. Where's our story of the true matrix, the dreaming that we live in, as opposed to history and the patrix we're currently subject to. So I highly recommend spending 40 minutes to look at the link that I have in the description. It's only 40 minutes. And some of the art alone. And the artwork is all artwork that Sylvia has put in her many, many videos. I mean, just the artwork. I have multiple screen saves where I'm watching things. I have to go, I wind back, I get it, do full screen, and then I do screen save, because some of the artwork she has is just astounding. And the artwork captures a way of life. And the perspective is gorgeous. And the thing is, when you look at the beauty of this lifestyle as reflected in this artwork, you can see why there might be a serious reason why those who have construed the Patrix and history would want us to think that that is our remote past, instead of instead of a maybe not quite recent, but not countless generations past. Hello, Lisa Gray. Well, Anya Mangus, we spell words and use cursive writing. In many, this opens up a can of worms, and maybe we can go into a little bit here. I don't know how long modern writing, or writing itself, has been around. Hello, Unis. It was relatively clear that the main way of transmitting information was pictographs, and then to me, what I would consider a very, very advanced form of getting those ideas down, which was Egyptian hieroglyphics. I was recently thinking, well, I was thinking, meditating, journeying, because usually it starts with thinking and then it just gets disassociated, and sometimes we just go out there. And that Egyptian hieroglyphic writing was probably the best way to externalize the kind of information exchanged at the telepathic level. Let's say that there was a period where a lot of the communication was done telepathically. Telepathic communication isn't in the normal language syntax that we understand. So imagine having a rich body of information that might very well have had an oral tradition as well, but also had its roots in a telepathic tradition of exchanging, information amongst adepts. Sort of like a rune, but maybe a little more complex. So imagine, having to try and get a way of conveying for posterity the information that was transmitted at let's call it a telepathic transmission level. Well, then I get the sense that hieroglyphs might have been the best way to capture a form of expressing those communications. And I think it was one of the really great scholars of Egypt, and somebody who, John Anthony West, who passed this year, somebody I've met a few times, even had dinner at his house. But he considered the man who understood Egypt was Schwaller de Lubitsch. And I think Schwaller had mentioned that there was at least a few places where there were hieroglyphs on both sides of the wall. And that to make any sense of what the information was conveyed there, you had to take in both sides of the wall. There was a way of integrating both of them. Schwaller de Lubitsch was a genius, and apparently a mystic as well as a scholar, and I don't know if you want to call him an explorer instead of an archaeologist, because the current archaeology as we know it was started only a couple hundred years ago, and archaeology began as a discipline that set out to prove the historicity of the Bible. Archaeology began to prove that the Bible was true. And that's why archaeology stumbles all over the things that it finds, because their whole discipline started to verify the, the biblical text, specifically the Old Testament. Talk about putting yourself in a rut or in a corner. Yeah, there's something I have watched hours of Bach saga material. And much of it done by Jem Cesare, I think is the man who has been doing the oral tradition. I don't know if he's just a little bit out there, or the information, or it's just that the information is just from a different form, and it's just kind of hard to take on all of it on board right now. But I've listened to hours of him speak, and but then I'm also coming from a certain amount of genetic memory myself, and I really am more concerned with us catching up to our now. And again, understand the biggest thing is, if we realize that this is a bunch of crap that we're being given as history, well, then maybe in certain ways we'll go, you know what, that's a little frustrating. We can't quite figure out the past right now, but why don't we go about figuring out our now and our future, because our future will soon become our now. And that's really part of, what I really want to do is not about making us look back over much, other than what parts of our spirit, what parts of, like, the feeling of how it was a couple of 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago on this planet. One of the things that I've really not enjoyed about conversations about past lives is often there's a focus there's kind of like a personality ego focus, okay? So I'm using the word personality, of who we were. Like, in other words, and again, like, oh, were you a king, were you a queen, were you this, blah, 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 all that, as opposed to what did it feel like to live in that time? And that's what I've kind of done, reaching back into my genetic memories, is what was the emotional tone of that life, as opposed to the specifics, because emotions imprint the most. Not the fleeting thoughts, the way you felt for years in your body as you went through that body, that imprints deeply. Night, Lisa. And the biggest feeling I get, not going back too far, is one of freedom and access to the very planet that is ours, that we are the sovereigns of. There was a time where every person on this planet was a sovereign, not some fucking king or self-declared king or queen. When the kingship was lowered from heaven kind of crap that we get from the Sumerian texts. And that brings another question into the timeline. How long ago was Sumeria? How long ago was it really? And also, when we look at, like, the king's list of the Sumerian king's list, the numbers over and over again are numbers that are part of astronomical observations. 432,000 years. Divisions of that. Divisions of the grand year. That there isn't a single Actually, what they usually do is they show the kings, and it seems like, incredibly long cycles, and then they get shorter and they get shorter. But each one of those numbers corresponds to one of the measurements of, either, the 26,000 year cycle or 25, whatever the numbers are. But there's not a single age or rulership of those kings that doesn't really show one of the, observations of the heavens. Not one. None of them are arbitrary. And so in many ways, the king's name might even be kings. There might be another assignation where the king is a code. But we don't need to know those codes either, because once you look at the numbers, you go, okay, well, we already got those numbers. We actually have, applicable phenomena for those numbers, and we don't need to even decode the king's name. There might be something there, but we have to consider the source. We have to consider the people who wrote that stuff, and whether or not, even if you broke the code, once you got what it really meant, whether what it really meant was in fact true, you might have worked that hard just to get to the other layer of false programming. And that's one of the things that they set up. They give you these mysteries to crack, because we have great imaginations. We love a mystery, except we don't. We love their mysteries instead of our or my story or our story. I mean, when we start looking at these words, history, mystery, my story, our story, and you start seeing the spell work, the weaving of spells, and the creation of bad spider webs that we get caught up in. And that's what I think a lot of people get caught up in, trying to decode, let's say, the Bible, thinking, there are other levels of meaning here. Yeah. But does it ever really change the narrative? Or does it just get like a more, a layer of magic or other layers that, the more intellectual people can go there and then feel like, I got the secrets. It looks really like a trap set for intelligent human beings. We're going to peel these onions, we're going to figure this out, going to decipher this, and it's all meant to keep you busy with their shit instead of getting busy about our shit, our history, the history that we're, the story that is being written right now, that when we look back will be our story. And then the casting forward into the future, so that as we arrive into subsequent nows, that we have laid the seeds, and then we run into the fruit in our nows by the seeds we place in the future. Good night, enjoy being. So I just, that's why I put the that video there. It really, I see. I've watched every video that Sylvie's put out on New Earth. If you see, scores or 100 or more videos there, I've watched every one of them, and some of them at least twice. There were some of her original when the survivors of Atlantis woke up, that she's redone. I highly recommend things about it. Well, I shouldn't say that, because the fact that it looks, that history has been adjusted all over the place, but they're seeing, because of some of the building styles, is kind of what they call neoclassical building style that's in Tokyo. Very interesting. And really opens up some questions. And then there's also some actual photos, because photography has been around for a while now. I mean, it was around in the Civil War. Photos of samurai. These people are clearly do not look like the Japanese of today. When you see the artistic renderings of samurai, and then you see some of the surviving photos of samurai, they are not the same ethnicity. From what I can tell, the Korean peninsula has been Korean for a long time. In other words, I don't think you're going to find any red-headed mummies in Korea. Unless they've been found, I don't know about it. But Korea's very old. And again, when Sylvies had access to a lot of things, and when she finds what looks like relatively recent signs of this global of this earth-wide kind of earth culture, had different strains, but they had knowledge of the megaliths, polygonal block usage. And freedom. And so I have to really wonder if much of what we're seeing that later emerges in both China and Japan didn't originate somewhere, maybe not originate in Korea. This is like a Joseph Farrell out on the twig of speculation. Ainu is the name of the race. Ainu. Oh, Brandon, there's no need to apologize. I'm aware that I started before, more than an hour after CW started his chat, but depending on where it was going, that there would be, if you were there, you'd stay there. Oh, I'm playing, it's funny. I'm playing I forgot I was playing that. I do have a background of rain falling. And it has some frogs and crickets in it, and occasionally hear hooting of an owl. Now here's the interesting thing with the destruction of what's not only what went on during the Gulf War, what's going on currently in the Syria conflagration. When you realize that the ISIS is a globalist tool, and suddenly they're blowing up all the old stuff. Syria is the heartland of the mysteries. I'm sure there are mystery schools in Greece, mystery schools in Egypt, but Syria is kind of like the heartland. And it was really interesting. I recently was looking at a map, and I think it was an Ottoman Empire map, so it can't be that old. And what they did was they were listing the ethnicities in very Eastern Europe, Western Asia, and the Levant. And where you see current Syria, which is, borders on Turkey, and they had, people like the Cappadocians and a number of things. But where current Syria is, the ethnicity, or subracial breakdown they had there were Assyrians. And then just a little bit south into the desert area of, from Syria, they had the Arabs. So only a couple of hundred years ago, not, whatever, Byzantine Empire, Ottoman Empire, they differentiated between Assyrians and Arabs. Yes, and Iranians. So we saw the destruction of much of older culture in Iraq, and then we see the same thing going on in Syria. One of the things that you'll see in some of the New Earth videos are quote-unquote ancient ruins. And how many of these ancient ruins seem to have some kind of cratering involved? Like, in other words, as if some kind of energy weapon was used there. An energy weapon could be a small yield atomic device or just a plasma bolt. A device, I guess, akin to what you read about in the Vedas, about these devices that were used that caused whole forests to incinerate. And so, and then there was also the interesting thing of the, in the 1800s, it's supposedly the little ice age that happened, you know, that real cooling period, at least 1 year without a summer. And they attributed that to Krakatoa blowing up. One volcano, they said, did that. One has to wonder if a relatively large campaign was not conducted in the interior of Asia, you know, places like Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, you know, that part of what was used to be Tartaria, or the Greater Russia. Think of Russia. Think of what Russia looked like during the Soviet times. So during Soviet times, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, they were part of the Soviet Union. So if you think about what the Soviet Union looked like, you might get a better idea of what Tartaria looked like. But this little winter that happened in the 1800s that was attributed to Krakatoa, it really does resemble a nuclear winter. And then when you watch in some of these New Earth videos, the kind of destruction that happened in these places, they don't look, you know, it wasn't like people deserted it. It's almost like, first of all, why they deserted it, but then when you see it, it looks like it was hit with an explosion. Well, that'd be a pretty good reason for people to leave something. Similarly, in South America, there, when you look at, you know, the ruins of some of the megalithic structures there, and they say it was caused by an earthquake. Earthquakes will shake things and cause them to fall and bounce a little bit, but some of these things are hundreds of feet from where they once were part of a building. What earthquake knocks tons of material hundreds of feet? So, you know, we hear a little bit about breakaway civilizations. And then you read the Vedas. So there certainly was. So now, what the time period of the Vedas is anybody's question. You could, thousands of years, whatever. Again, with the historic timeline in serious question, it just happened in our past. But that distance from now, that's really open for interpretation. So what we do know, I love that Atlas Shuttered Raksha, by the way. But what we do know is that in the Indian texts, there are recordings of what we'll just call very energetic weapons. What produces the energy, that we don't need to get there. Something that can do a lot of damage. The use of energy to create an explosive and devastating effect. And most it's I get the feeling that this is not so distant. In many ways, Walter Bosley is doing incredible work. And he has his Empire of the Wheel, and then he has another. And he writes some fiction, but these were his nonfiction works. And then, if I recall, there's another one that's about the explorations, I believe, of Richard Burton into South America. And not only Richard Burton, but even some of the official like let's say the Portuguese and Spanish, but especially the Portuguese because they went into Brazil. Found whole civilization, whole cities, thriving populations, living very well. And that in many ways it looks as if part of these explorations were to identify and I guess get coordinates for parts of the not so distant past natural world and a wholesome way of living for these examples of how we can live to be wiped out. Because if you have an example of people with great society and everybody's happy and none of the problems of modern society coexisting with the modern one with all of its fuckery and problems, well then you want that other example to disappear. And so whatever these energy weapons were, they were around long enough to make it into whatever time context the Vedas are written into. Well, hello, Forrest. With regard to plasma currents, seems to me there's no question that there's been times of very high plasmic electricity, even to the point of it's best to live in those kind of like places you see in Cappadocia, like stay out of the sun during the day. But that kind of generalized plasma discharge is different than than directed hits at cities and towns. It's not like you see these kind of things out in the middle of nowhere where there's no ruins. These discharges are occurring where people were living. So to me, then it doesn't tie into natural phenomenon that could be very challenging, but an intentional phenomenon, even if that intentional phenomena is an evil use of working with other phenomena, natural phenomena. So being is like some of the ideas I'm going into, and these are all suppositions, okay? If I've made an assertion, I'm not sure, and I'm very content with everything being put forward as a supposition. And then as we can get clearer, maybe some of these suppositions we can turn into assertions. But the thing we really want to assert is that we will have a hand in our future, and our future starts in our now. And so that calls for a situational awareness. And a situation of our consciousness, besides our bodies, the vehicles of our consciousness. I better get out of the chat. A few triggery words there. And part of that situational awareness is about getting away from examining conspiracies and the multiple layers of them. History is the biggest conspiracy of all. So when you have something as big as, like, you know, what you think about the world you live in itself, the history of the world that we're given is a conspiracy, maybe we can start giving up on all that small shit that doesn't really affect us. JFK doesn't really affect us. 9/11, how's that affected us? Grabbing your balls grabbed as you try to board a plane, or your tits molested. That's how 9/11 affected us. And if you want to stop the TSA, it isn't by busting 9/11, it's by stopping frivolous travel. If you're not a business person and absolutely must get somewhere, traveling is frivolous. And as long as the airlines stay profitable, they will continue to molest you. Because apparently, to go on vacation or visiting grandma, it's okay to be molested on the way. And until we say, no, it isn't, and until you pull the gropers out of those gates, we're just going to have to say hello to grandma on Skype. We're going to have to look at pictures of a 5-star hotel in Bali instead of flying there, because it's not necessary for us to do these things. It isn't. I think it's very necessary to get rid of the molesters, as that you know, do what they do, and relieve us of things that we think we want to travel with. Oh, you're not permitted to travel with this. That's so much nonsense, and it would not exist if the airlines collapsed, because we just said we're not taking it anymore. How many people of the millions of people that fly have to fly? It's only the business class that has to fly. And the business class could not keep the airlines alive. So there's a lot we can do against the conspiracies. But it's about changing habits. It's about situational awareness. And rather than what are they doing to us, how about how we're helping them do what they do to us? And we help them grope us by using their airlines when we don't essentially have to fly. I've only flown twice, and not before they got into the groping things, and it was because I hadn't seen my son, and I needed to see him. And this was before the scatter. I think I did one scatter ray. The first time I traveled, they didn't have the irradiation machine, and then the second time I was just like, okay, I'm done. And if you must fly, fly as a shaman. Yeah, this is basically, to me, this is the big conspiracy. Their story, which we call history, is the big conspiracy. And before modern telecommunications, how many parts of that old civilization have been wiped out in just the last 100 years, or 150, 200 max maybe? You know, Tartaria was still what it was, and when you can find an ancient map, and their flags were still part of the registry. And then if you go read, they're going to say, oh yeah, it was part of this Khanate in Turkmenistan or Uzbekistan. That, boy, is that stretching it. And then other people have, you know, said, oh man, that's a quackademic. answer. And that's what we have right now. The popular support, the official history, is supported by quackademics. Anyway, so Walter Bosley, I think, is doing research into the journeys, the explorations, the explorer Richard Burton. And those books are sold on Lulu, and when I get a little money, I want to get them there. I want to get Walter Bosley's nonfiction, because he's on to a thread of a wholesome tapestry there. And very often finding one real thread leads you to the tapestry, or at least the edge of it. And Richard Burton was just finding all kinds of, we'll call, civilization. In other words, very civilized people living in the jungles of South America. And and this is like in the 1800s, and these places are gone. The people that were there are not there anymore. So, and with the explosions that we see all over Asia, like in the stands, with the not necessarily Afghanistan, more west of that, and what used to be the Soviet Union, it really looks like in the last 200 years there was a lot of erasure and destruction done that was able to, we didn't have modern media, and of course, there were newspapers, but if the reporters didn't know, or the editor says, no, we're not covering that. But I mean, how many people had reporters in remote parts of the central steppes of Asia, where there apparently were some, until a couple hundred years ago, some really thriving towns, and if there's nobody to report it, it just happens. People die, towns were erased. History is occluded or completely fictionalized, and these are ancient ruins. But in so many of these ancient ruins, there are craters. These destroyed towns. They look like they were hit. And I think there was a period that resulted in the Little Ice Age, attributed to Krakatoa, that I think was probably attributable to a campaign in Central Asia of energy weapons, and that resulted in a lot of dust in the atmosphere and producing that winter. That's my supposition. Good night, Forever Consciousness. Conscious. So anyway, we're coming up to 2 hours, so I'm gonna stop my kind of doing whatever I was doing, talking about our story. What was the title I put there? History is not our story. Official timeline in question. So I've kind of said my piece. I'm going to sit here for a few minutes, finish my cigarette, and see if anybody has anything in there. If you wrote a question to me, please write it again. And I thank you all for, thank you all for coming here, and again, I meant there was no disrespect to C.W. Chandler, because a lot of times, if two of us, I started way over an hour after he began, and there's this, I think there's room. It's like having it's like having two bars open on a Saturday night, and one is doing one kind of music, and the other bar's having another kind of music, and you might start at one and then go, you know what, I've heard a set or two here, let me go over catch a set there before they shut down. So I really don't necessarily see it as competition, because anybody who's, if I'm doing a stream, it's available after, when with a short time later it's processed, it's available. It's not like you miss it. Um, and this way here, there's certain things that I'll be saying that, some of the, CW and I have different styles. I'm not gonna say we have different hearts, but we have different styles. And that that's natural, organic diversity, not orchestrated diversity. That's just natural. He's who he is, I'm who I am. Okay, I just got a question. I did ask him. So thank you, Oswald. I don't have a single desire to change CW's opinions. Right now, my biggest desire regarding CW is he stays on this course of staying sober. That's the most. When it comes to CW, there's nothing more important for me than he stays sober. And on the mend, and connecting in with what he considers to be sacred. Even if what he thinks is sacred is different than what I think is sacred, once you start playing around in the sacred, you're going to be open to downloads and good things. His opinion of JLL, I don't care. JLL doesn't care. He even wrote. I think he replied to CW in one of my comments. JLL replied directly. Says, "I don't want fans. I detest fans." And I've been listening to CW for years. He's a friend of mine. He's a brother. I know who CW is. Publicly enough publicly. Let's put it that way. So, and then I know what JLL is saying publicly. So knowing the public CW that I know, and knowing the things that JLL has said publicly, I can understand why CW might not have a good opinion of him. I know everything that JLL has said. I've listened to just about everything he's ever said on the internet. And then on Walter Bosley. Walter Bosley is doing something quite unique, and part of what he's doing has a sense of place and genetics or DNA or something. Walter Bosley is doing some pretty deep work, and he's doing work that has a lot to do with who he is. From who he is, and not just this life of his. Yeah, Brandon, I'm just responding to what Oswald said. So I don't know. I never heard what CW has to say about Walter Bosley. I think I like Walter Bosley. He's intelligent. He's got a sense of humor. He's got a little bit of an impish attitude to him. I think Walter Bosley is cool. Is really a cool guy. I like that he's cautious because he wants to be taken, serious as a researcher. But like when he was on Nox Mente, that was like certainly one of my favorite Nox Mente shows was Walter Bosley on Nox Mente. And because of the nature, and especially with Niche being there, Niche does most of the questioning. She really was getting Walter in touch with some of the more magical, experiential, shamanic, that's what I wanted. Shamanic kind of consciousness that he's engaging. And of course, he really caught my ear when he mentioned Hecate. And what it is I had been doing some research on Hecate, and her being the patroness or god, guardian, the goddess of portals. And so the portals can mean anything like, crossroads, doorways. Doorways a big part of, protecting, doorways, or even the entries into temples. This whole transition from, the portal, like, if you're outside a building, you're outside, and then when you cross the threshold, you're inside. That's a portal. Not an interdimensional portal, a portal. And other portals from, so then there also are dimensional portals. Some of those dimensional portals are in our body as chakras. Okay. But when you kind of break down the meaning of what a chakra is, there's a real strong urge the chakras are wheels. Okay? All right, so we have chakras, portals, wheels. And then we have Walter Bosley mentioning Hecate, an interaction with her. And so besides his Richard Burton works, what is this other nonfiction? Empire of the Wheel. So when you have Empire of the Wheel and Hecate coming out from the same person, basically in the same paragraph, you had my head exploding in a delicious way. Walter Bosley is somebody I would love to speak to, because there are questions I would ask him that other people probably, it wouldn't occur to them to ask him, because they're thinking differently. They see where Walter Bosley is speaking, and I'm listening to all the things he's saying, but I'm also hearing well, I'm not comfortable there. I'll kind of allude to this, but whatever. And the stuff that he dances around is the stuff I'm going, oh, Walter, man, that's what I want to talk about. And I can even talk about it in language where you can stay safe, but we can still kind of go there. Yeah, Walter Bosley is somebody I would love to speak to. But he's on to something. This Empire of the Wheel, Hecate connection. Well, it's interesting how he mentioned Hecate, because he mentioned her name, but then he also mentioned that apparently the goddess that he is most attached to, if I got his language right, I certainly don't want to attribute things that he didn't say, because again, when he got into this territory, there was a lot of guarded language. But he did kind of reference that, although he saw Hecate, that his patroness is Athena. And when he said that, I went, okay, you're with Athena, but see, in my take, Athena is an archontic contrivance from the old daughters of Gaia. Hecate is a true daughter of Gaia. And that's why if you do any research into Hecate, they'll make her a Titan. The breakout story of the archaic Greek myth of just when there's just the sky, Uranus, and the earth, Gaia, and who their children are, to me, is very much, if you know anything about the behavior of a cuckoo bird, where it puts its eggs in the nest of another bird, and then those birds grow up with the other birds, but it's not of their species. Well, for me, Gaia did have energetic offspring, besides then later us, the anthropos, but kind of prior to that, as other aspects of herself, of the planetary animal mother. She had her brood. And then when the story breaks out, and this is a story of the Titans, what the Titans do is they place themselves in Gaia's nest. Because they have the Titans arising out of Gaia. And the Titans did not arise out of Gaia. The Titans are part of the we'll call it Anunnaki Archontic usurpers. And one of the way they usurp it is in through the taking of the archaic myth, and then when that myth breaks out into what we'll call the next stage with the Titans, and then come the Olympians. The Titans insert themselves into the original, I guess we'll call it the softer form of the master narrative of the Sophianic narrative. Because the archaic Greek, Uranus, Gaia myth is a simplified form of the master narrative. But we don't get it in its original. We kind of get like this thing where everything was, and then we have what I call the breakout. And the breakout is when you get the Titans. You know something, Oswald? I would have to say yes. Because it's looking more and more to me that Gaia is another media company in every sense of the archontic meaning of modern media. If it didn't, and it might have started out actually wholesome, Gaiam, and then the moment, you have to realize the way things work currently on the world is the parasites have no creativity. So they leave it for humans to create something viable and brilliant. And then once it has some money flowing into it, once it has the attention of enough people, well, then you have people who come along and they go, oh, I want to invest and make your company better. All you need is a little capital. And then they buy their way into, everybody, oh, we get to expand. Yeah, expansion needs to come organically. If you're using an archontic money system to suddenly expand, it's not particularly wholesome. And that's what I think would happen. And so then they drop the M, and I think Gaia TV is the the reconstituted media networked form. It's like it was their inroad. It was the Goob's inroad into the an alternative media network. Something that had started, I feel, quite innocent. David Icke did the same thing with his TV station. That's why it crashed. It started out with good people. Then they get, they need money. Who shows up with the money? The good guys? Maybe a few. But overall, it's like, oh, they need money. That's our call to get involved. Lucius Trust is, is certainly suspect, but it's what we kind of see. What we're kind of seeing in the world is that there's a lot of parasites. Not as a ratio to non-parasites, but there's enough, and they all kind of need their little fiefdoms, their own little kingdoms. And so the world is largely, okay, well, you get this country, you get that country, whatever. And it's just a doling out of territory that has a border and police. Basically, it's control of the human population through their network of either bloodline family members or stooges. So, and then they keep an eye out. There's all it's there. They don't have the brilliance. They don't have the creativity to even create the wonderful narratives that would pull people in. They have to leave that to humans to get that going, and then they appropriate after the spell's been woven, after people have been engaged. That's when they take it over. That's why to insert the narrative of a jealous God and heaven or hell and born in sin, They had to take great stories of wonderful wisdom that you find in the Old Testament and New Testament. You know, people go, oh my God, there's great value here. They had to put it there, and they got it from us. Those are our traditions over thousands and thousands of years. So why does it sound wise? Because we came up with it. And so again, they always need, the parasites always need something wholesome, brilliant, creative, imaginative, that the anthropos does, and then they, like a virus, insert their DNA into it and commandeer it. And a lot of it has to do with the way they set up the world with the money. So, you know, and everybody, you know, and then also they've cultivated this thing where rather than people saying, you know what, let's just grow as we can. But a lot of people also find out if they don't kind of go along, then you'll get energy weapons. And that's why we have to come together as kind of like a, you know, a connected consciousness. We have to unite our hearts. Not our, you know, no need for us to think alike, but if we can be heart-minded as opposed to like-minded, we can bond with our hearts, and then we can, you know, thrash out the good ideas, throw the ideas together, and see which ones take the beating and still hold up. So other than that, one question from Oswald. Actually, I got two questions, right? There was the Gaia TV, and the other one was about CW. Should we change CW's opinion on JLL? You know, and even if CW liked JLL as a person, you know, I'm hearing, you know, he's really doing some spiritual work on himself, and you know, he's mentioning more and more these, you know, I hear it in his language. I'm paying attention. The Sophianic narrative is I don't really see at the moment how that wouldn't collide with the narrative that he's working with. So even if we manage to make him like JLL, I don't know that would change. See, for me, the whole thing is about the narrative. And same thing for JLL. It isn't about John Lamb Lash. It's about the Sophianic narrative, the master narrative, the one that connects us back into the earth and allows us to tap into wisdom, because that's what Sophia means. And so, you know, it's not the Sophianic narrative is JLL is the one who was intended to bring it forward, and he did. But now that it's there, it's about the narrative and not about JLL. He's there to teach us more and teach us celestics and other. I mean, he's an incredible man with an enormous body of work. One only has to go to meta history and try to find the end of it to realize how much work he's done. And so, once again, when it comes to CW, I just want to see him still sober and getting in a better place, and I see that happening, and that brings me joy. That's, like I said, that is my focus and concern for CW, is his well-being and his integration with his family, and they're doing well. He can hate on JLL all he wants as long as he's doing okay, because it doesn't affect JLL, and JLL has told him as much. So, I'm going to say it one more time. In the description is a 40-minute, or I'm lying, 41-minute video. Not lying, I'm rounding numbers. That I think is worth your time. Because especially if you find, you know, like where do I start with New Earth, or you just never get there, there's a link right there. 40 minutes, great artwork. There's none of the about the various explosions of the past. This is very focused on some text and the timeline issue. That's what its focus is, and I really think you'll enjoy it. The 40 minutes will fly by. And so thank you all for joining in this, one of the bars, one of the community bars that was open tonight. CW opened the bar first. I opened the bar a little bit later, and it's all good. Again, there's no way. There's a whole point where there is no competition here. We're doing the same. We're doing the same thing in slightly different flavors. So if one place is serving Coca-Cola and the other place is serving root beer, then it just becomes a palate kind of thing. And so yes, it is. Hello, Christopher Bryden, and welcome, or Breeden, in case I mispronounced your last name. So thank you for making these. Thank you for making these live streams. Mine, Rox's, Joe from the Carolinas, CW's. Thank you for just making the live streams good places to be. A reason to turn a camera on and live stream to begin with, and so it's really appreciated. I speak for myself and I speak for other people who do live streams. It is very much appreciated, the participation. Yeah, the den of snore or the den of bore. Yeah. Chris has his own thing going on over there, and I'm not subscribed anymore, so I don't get when he's going live, and I don't get like, oh, maybe I should check it out. It's just like, no. Hello, Jet Pet. And again, I have zero against my brother, in this case, Masonic brother, Chris Zuger. He's doing what he's doing. Honestly, from my heart, the best to you, Chris, man. Make it work, make it zing, make it fly. If that's what it's meant to be. I know it's what you want it to be. There's certainly no. I want you to have what you want, if it can be done. Oh, he is? Well. And maybe, the interesting thing, Brandon, I mean, that you're saying he's a competitive guy. I'll work on that, because you might know better than me. We're leaving the times where competition will be rewarded. Now, to compete is to taste what's wrong with competition. To me, it's to have a live stream, a half-an-hour live stream, and 2 people show up. Occasionally I go look at things he's already put up, and then watch the live stream. And I don't know what he had a relatively short video he put up recently, and there was 2 people in the live stream. It was a short one though. And I just if you have the wrong spirit now, it's not a good time to be in the wrong spirit. And and that's enough said, because again, even when one of our brothers is being a little bit, being who they are, gotta hold the space for them. Just leave that space. Do what you gotta do. I mean, it's hardly like he's coming again. I don't feel any bad energy from him. I don't feel like he's creating. Chris is doing what Chris is doing. And it's like what we all do, and then you find out. It's like when I went out and played at a live in an open mic night, and realized I want to practice a little more before I do my next open mic. So anyway, I guess I've been saying goodbye for a while now, so this will be it. And oh, he did threaten to. Again, I do stay out of the soap. I do stay out of the soap operas of the internet community. Occasionally I'll get wind from somebody like you. I just got wind there, but I largely am not in there because it's just, it reminds me of being in a schoolyard shortly after puberty, and it's been a few years since that time. All right, everybody. So let me just turn off the streaming. And it'll probably shut down in a few seconds. And